Welcome back. All right, so as we sit less than a week away from the start of the 2025-2026 NHL regular season, I've already done a video talking about teams that are under pressure for a good start, and I've talked about coaches. And in some cases, there are coaches that aren't under that much pressure because they're new. So while the team on the ice may be under pressure to get off to a good start, the blame won't necessarily fall onto the coach if that team gets off to a bad start. That's why there were certain coaches who I don't see as being under a lot of pressure, even though the team that they're coaching is. And sometimes that blame goes further up the chain of command. Sometimes it's the general manager. So I want to look at all the general managers, from the most recently hired to the one that's longest tenured, so all the way from Matthew Darch to Doug Armstrong. Doug Armstrong, the longest tenured general manager in the National Hockey League currently. But we'll start with Matthew Darch as we discuss general managers that might be under some pressure, that if their team gets off to a slow start, the finger could be pointed at them. Matthew Darch, as he was only hired May 23rd of this year, not a lot of pressure on Darch. One thing to keep in mind is there are 9 new coaches who did not coach their team to finish this season that are coaching to start this season. There are only 3 new GMs. General managers are definitely a bunch that have some more job security than do coaches, because the general manager can fire the coach. Coach cannot fire the general manager. Ken Holland, brought in May 14th of 2025 by the LA Kings. Of course, he's safe because he just took over. So the Islanders and the Kings, both teams that the general managers are just starting to figure out things there. Jason Botterill taking over in Seattle, April 22nd of 2025. So these are your 3 new GMs. The pressure's not on Botterill at this point, although there's definitely some pressure on Seattle to show progression. I think that if they don't, a lot of that blame will be thrown, at least by media and fans, towards Ron Francis more than Botterill. Now, general managers who were in place before this past season, or before this season is about to start. Stan Bowman took over the Oilers July 24th of 2024. Bowman, I don't think there's any pressure. I don't think there's any chance he loses his job. I think there is one thing, but it's not something right now, is in the event they lose McDavid for nothing. So let's just say they go through the whole season and McDavid leaves as a free agent. Maybe. And if the Oilers fall apart and then lose McDavid, then maybe we talk about Bowman's job security, but it's unlikely. Chris Patrick, the general manager for the Washington Capitals since July 8th of 2024. Pretty safe, I would say, especially considering the season the Capitals just put up when nobody expected that. Don Waddell in Columbus since May 28th of 2024. He's pretty safe as well, even though Columbus has pressure to make the playoffs this year. Waddell's done a very good job with this squad, especially coming out of the Johnny Hockey tragedy. Honestly, Waddell did a good job this past season with the team, and I think he had a good offseason as well. Eric Tulsky in Carolina, May 24th of 2024. He took over. He's not in any kind of danger either. There's definitely some pressure on the Carolina Hurricanes, but I don't think a slow start necessarily is a huge deal for Carolina if that takes place. Bill Armstrong, so I used a different color for him, same as I did Andre Tourney, because technically hired by the Utah Mammoth April 18th of 2024 before they were the Mammoth. Bill Armstrong's not under a whole lot of pressure either, although the Utah Mammoth are expected to be in the mix for, if not in a playoff spot at the end of the year. And so there's a little bit of pressure, but not out of the gate. This is about, general managers who might have to worry if a team gets off to a slow start. I still don't think we've got anybody on the board that would be out as general manager for a slow start. Steve Staios with Ottawa, November 1st of 2023. I think the fact that Ottawa made the playoffs for the first time in a long time this past season, Staios definitely has some leeway here. Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh, August 3rd of 2023. He took over. Obviously, nobody's expecting a lot from the Pittsburgh Penguins this year, so I don't think Dubas is under a lot of pressure. Barry Trotz took over Nashville, July 1st of 2023. I don't think Trotz is under any pressure either, unless there's a perception by others that he's in over his head as a general manager, and I'm just saying it's the only way I could see there being a potential for any kind of danger. I don't think Nashville wants to get off to another slow start, but I don't think expectations in Nashville are sky high either. Toronto, Brad Treliving, May 31st of 2023. Brad's done a good job, especially navigating everything coming out post Marner and players who've been brought in and all that. I think he's doing his best to try to finally make Toronto a four-line team. He's definitely got the goaltending in pretty good shape, and now it's a matter of rounding out your depth scoring and maintaining that defensive aspect of things as well. Craig Conroy took over the Flames May 23rd of 2023. Craig Conroy, no danger there, obviously. The Calgary Flames are not a team that has a lot of expectations, so if they struggle out of the gate, I don't think it's going to be a huge surprise, and I don't think it changes anything in Calgary. I think there's a plan to get as many young players as possible into the lineup, keep your veterans who want to stay in Calgary, and move anybody out that doesn't necessarily want to stick around, rather than keeping them around when they don't necessarily want to be there, which I think is the right way to go with it. Danny Briere took over in Philadelphia March 10th of 2023. I think he's earned a lot of leeway as well. He's done a good job with a team that hasn't made the playoffs yet, but I think that the hiring of Rick Tocchet and some of the young players that they've picked up, I do think with guys like Luchenko and Martone, when they're in the lineup and they reach their peak, I think Philadelphia's going to be a pretty good scoring team. So I think Briere's got a lot of time before he'd have to worry about his job. Chris McFarland in Colorado, July 11th, 2022 was his hire date. I don't think McFarland's in any danger either. So we have yet to find a general manager that I think that if a team gets off to a slow start, they have to worry about their job. It is a little bit more secure of a job than is coaching. Mike Grier took over in San Jose July 5th, 2022. I've heard a lot of negativity about Mike Grier. I don't buy into it. I think Grier's a good general manager. I think he's done the best that he can with what he's had. And inheriting a San Jose team that was going nowhere fast, I think he's done a good job with the additions made and with the way trades have gone through and everything. I still think both the Meyer trade and various other trades too, where veterans have gone out the door, and like Hurdle's obviously the big one. I still think he's done well in those deals. I don't think Grier's in any danger, especially since San Jose's not expected to be a lot better. Pat Verbeek, February 3rd of 2022, he took over in Anaheim. Now today he gives a huge payday to Lacombe. It has really shown us how many people are not watching the Anaheim Ducks. I get it, but Lacombe is a fantastic defenseman who's got a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential with these Ducks, and so I think Verbeek is safe at this stage. Patrick Allvin in Vancouver, January 26, 2022. You know, there shouldn't be any danger with Allvin, but there's speculation that there could be. There's speculation that if Vancouver gets off to a really slow start, Allvin could be out of a job, which I think would be a shame because I know that they wanted to add center depth over the summer. It's hard. It's really difficult to add a center. Teams are not moving top two centers. They're just not, because they know how important center depth is. So I don't put the blame on Allvin. I've seen that where, whose fault is it they didn't go out and get a center? I don't know. Who went out and got a center on the offseason who's going to be a top two center? Who went out and made a trade to get a top two center in the NHL? And then compare that to the list of teams looking for a number two center in the NHL. It's a lot. So whether it's right or wrong, I do get the feeling that Allvin's job is not 100% safe at this point in time. I think it comes down to ownership gets a lot of the discussion, and I think that's true. I think ownership expects playoffs. So whether we get him or not, whole other discussion. Kent Hughes in Montreal, January 18th of 2022, he took over. I think if you proposed at this point you get a Kent Hughes statue in Montreal, I think there's Habs fans that would be okay with that. Kent Hughes has really, it's been a masterclass of how to sell veterans off, pick up prospects, pick up your draft picks, and just knowing which players to add when and which players to move and when. Kent Hughes has just had a really good feeling for this. He has a knack for being general manager. He's very, very good at it. And so I think Montreal's in good hands. Even if they get off to a slow start, Kent Hughes isn't going anywhere. I would say the same of Kyle Davidson in Chicago. Chicago can get off to a slow start. Davidson was hired October 26th of 2021, so 4 years now since he took over Chicago. I think he's done a good job of getting a lot of young players, picking up prospects, draft picks, all that. So I don't think there's any danger for Davidson. Chris Drury. If I'd asked this question 6 months ago, there are a lot of Ranger fans who would say, yes, Chris Drury's done a poor job. There are others who would defend the job he's done, depending on who you root for or not on the Rangers roster, or formerly on the Rangers roster. But he took over May 5th of 2021. If the Rangers get off to a disastrous start, this is where it gets tough, because there is pressure on the Rangers to get back into the playoffs. They just brought in Mike Sullivan as coach. His job is safe. Does it hit Chris Drury if this team gets off to a slow start? If it's apparent that whatever the Rangers have done in the offseason has not fixed things, do we see Chris Drury out? And I'm not saying that we do, but it does feel like something would have to give in New York, and you already just replaced the coach. So general manager would be the next place to look, since trades in the NHL and fixing the roster mid-season, that's rare. Bill Zito took over in Florida September 2nd, 2020. I think he's done a pretty good job. Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I mean, if you just judge a general manager by Stanley Cups, there's the President's Trophy in there. There's the Stanley Cup final appearance in between the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cups. Sure, that's not bad. So the Florida Panthers dealing with an era of unprecedented success, at least for the franchise. And Zito, arguably the best general manager in the National Hockey League. I say arguably because if I say he is, the arguments start. Kevin Adams in Buffalo, June 16th of 2020. Kevin Adams has been a general manager more than half of his time as general manager is greater than more than half the GMs in the NHL. That's what I was trying to say. It's interesting. June 16th of 2020 means he's been on the job for 5 years. I think if Buffalo gets off to a disastrous start, I think Kevin Adams is probably gone. That is one general manager that I think probably wants a really good start, because if not, it might be his job that's next. I don't think Lindy Ruff goes. I think it'll be Kevin Adams if it's a disastrous start for Buffalo. Tom Fitzgerald in New Jersey, January 12th of 2020, he was hired. Fitzgerald's done a good job. And I think if New Jersey get off to a slow start, I don't think that's going to affect him. All of the Hughes discussion, which is still where it is. Outside of that, he's built a pretty good squad. Good forward depth, good defense, good goaltending. He did pivot and make sure the goaltending and defense got fixed over the last, 18 months. So he deserves full credit for that. I think his job's pretty safe. Kelly McCrimmon in Vegas since September 1st of 2019. That's when they bumped George McPhee up to team president, because they didn't want to lose Kelly McCrimmon. Other teams were inquiring about Kelly McCrimmon, willing to give him a look at general manager, and so Vegas made him the general manager. And it's worked out really well for both Kelly and the Vegas Golden Knights. So, yeah, Kelly McCrimmon, pretty safe. They just brought in Marner, so you sometimes get off to a slow start when you got new players and you're trying to work out chemistry. I don't think McCrimmon's job's in any danger at all. Bill Guerin took over in Minnesota August 21st of 2019. I've seen a lot of negativity towards Bill Guerin. And if you believe that Kaprizov got too much money, the good news is Boldy's a bargain, comparatively speaking, with others. I think the Rossi contract came in at a very good cap hit as well. I think Faber's cap hit's going to age quite well. $8.5 million is his cap hit. Now Lacombe's getting $9 million. So, honestly, I think some of those Minnesota contracts I think it's going to balance out. I think they'll be fine. And I think as long as Minnesota doesn't have a ridiculously bad start, Guerin should be pretty safe, especially in light of his part with Team USA and all that. So I don't think Guerin's going anywhere. Steve Yzerman in Detroit since April 19th of 2019. I know there are people who aren't happy that I talk about how I'm less of a believer in the Yzer plan now than I was a couple years ago, but it's been 6 years, and there's a general manager named Kent Hughes that came into just as dire a situation in Montreal and kind of dug him out. So, as well as Steve Stais there in Ottawa, digging them out and getting them back into the playoffs. So the pressure's definitely there. And I think if Detroit has another rough or bad year, I think that could cost Steve Yzerman his job. It has happened where a general manager will do a decent job in one location, and you feel like, it's just another year, give him another year, and the team doesn't do it. Florida comes to mind, for instance. In before Bill Zito took over, previous general manager, doing a pretty good job of bringing players in. Obviously, Zito is on a whole other level, but could Detroit end up doing something similar? Say Yzerman ends up out of a job, they bring somebody else in after things go well. One example I'd use as well is in Carolina. Ron Francis, I thought, did a good job, but the playoff results weren't there. So they went and got Don Waddell, which I thought at the time, that's crazy. Don Waddell? And then Carolina was a mainstay in the playoffs once Don Waddell took over. So sometimes even if we as fans go, I don't know if that's the right move. Sometimes teams make that move and it works out pretty well. Tampa. Julian Brisebois, the one that took over from Yzerman in Tampa when he left there. September 11th of 2018 for Brisebois. I think he's done a good job, and I don't think there's any danger for Brisebois' job if they get off to a slow start, especially if they do so without Vasilevsky. Vasilevsky is the MVP of the team, I think, when everybody's going. So I think Brisebois' job's pretty safe. Don Sweeney. I'm pausing because there's some booing right now from Boston fans hearing the name. May 20th of 2015. He's been general manager for over a decade in Boston. And there's been a lot of success along the way, but this last couple of years, not necessarily as much. And they fired Bruce Cassidy. He won a Stanley Cup in Vegas. They fired Jim Montgomery. Montgomery dragged St. Louis into the playoffs. And so I do think that with the first year of Marco Sturm behind the bench, I think there's got to be some pressure on Sweeney, especially if those above Sweeney expect playoffs. And clearly the way Boston approached this offseason, they think they can jump back into the playoffs. And there are definitely fans that agree with them. So in the event that Boston has tremendous struggles out of the gate, maybe with Don Sweeney, although there's a perception that Don Sweeney and Cam Neely are kind of joined at the hip. So maybe you'd have to get rid of both, and I don't see that ever happening, so how safe is Sweeney? I feel like he's pretty safe, even if Boston gets off to a bad start. Jim Nill in Dallas, April 29th of 2013. Jim Nill took over there. He is widely recognized as one of the best general managers in the game. I don't think that if Dallas gets off to a slow start, there's any danger to his job. I think he is pretty impervious at this point. I think Nill's there until he retires. I'd be very surprised if Dallas ever makes a change at general manager. Kevin Cheveldayoff in Winnipeg, June 8th of 2011. I think for Cheveldayoff to end up out of a job, I think a slow start by Winnipeg doesn't have any effect on his job security. Might for Scott Arniel at least a little bit more than Cheveldayoff. But if they have some kind of regression this year, and if Kyle Connor walks for nothing at the end of the year, that would, I think, put some pressure on Kevin Cheveldayoff, because they just watched Ehlers walk for nothing. So they cannot do that with Kyle Connor. They need to re-sign Connor is my stance on that. But I do think Kevin Cheveldayoff, while there are people who don't like the job he's done, I don't think his job's in any danger. Which brings us to Doug Armstrong, the St. Louis Blues GM, the longest tenured in the league. July 1st of 2010, he took over there. And of course, 2019, St. Louis won their first and to date only Stanley Cup. And he's done a good job. I don't think there's much danger for Doug Armstrong's job either. I think last summer when he picked up Holloway and Broberg via offer sheets, I think that really helped. I do, because both of them worked out. And some of these draft picks that St. Louis has been getting, middle of the first round, they've turned out really, really well. And so I think that with smart drafting, smart additions, and just a standard where they're usually in the playoffs, I think Armstrong's job's pretty safe. So that's the difference between general managers and coaches. Coaches, I can find a lot more that I can say, I think this guy might be in a little bit more danger than I can with general managers. I can find a couple that are maybes. And again, with Alvin, it just feels like there's this sort of a cloud hanging over the Canucks that which makes sense since there's so much rain in Vancouver. But this idea that if Vancouver doesn't show any improvement, if they're not a playoff team early on, that maybe they make a change. But let me know your thoughts. Which GM do you think is not necessarily concerned about their job, but understand that a slow start could be difficult to explain to those above them and might cost them their job? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. As I said previously, Which teams are necessarily facing pressure? It can be different from the coach and the general manager. Sometimes it's the team and the coach, the team and the general manager. Sometimes it's just the players on the ice, that everything else has been, all right, you guys got what you wanted. Get the production going and get above the playoff line. But let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.